Hey there, Film Buds. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. I'm your host, Paul.
And I'm Lauren.
And happy 4th of July.
Woo! Independence Day.
Yeah, it's not technically the 4th. It's actually July 1st. If you're listening to this when it's new. If you're not, you're late to the party.
And these rules don't apply to you anymore.
Bitch. Anywho. No, sorry. Anywho. But no, it's 4th of July weekend, and it's maybe a complicated time to decide to celebrate 4th of July, so I won't necessarily say that we are celebrating 4th of July, but we are here to commemorate.
Yeah. Okay, I like that.
Aha. And we can have fun commemorating without fully necessarily embracing the idea of celebration, because I think that it would be disingenuous to truly say that I personally am celebrating the 4th of July this year.
I mean, I didn't do anything for Juneteenth this year, so I definitely don't think that I'm doing anything for 4th of July. I think on the scale of, which Independence Day holiday, actually, really symbolizes independence, I'd say the Juneteenth.
No, that's fair. But, all the same, we did want to commemorate it. And last year, with Henry and I, we decided to do a whole big Independence Day double feature.
Oh, yeah.
And this year, even just, I decided some of this stuff a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened that I was accidentally still very topical in some of the selections.
I mean, honestly, as I've gotten older, I've noticed, the trends of history. Mm-hmm. And I think that, things come and they go and it's always, around again. And I think that it happening to be topical is just, also the fact that it's history recycling itself.
And it's also a little bit probably that some of this was on my mind.
I mean, honestly, probably. This has been the climate of the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Really. So, any instance that is happening right now that is relevant to this is also just because of the entire, ether is the heartbeat of America right now. Yeah.
I decided that I wanted to do that was kind of a tangential way for me to get back around to the idea of, I decided that I wanted to do a sort of civically minded 4th of July celebration. Because I feel that 4th of July is, and I guess it really struck me recently, again, after I even decided the movies for the episode, I heard people talking about 4th of July, and I heard some people being essentially like, I'm still gonna celebrate, because for me, it's just food and fireworks.
Interesting.
And that really hit an interesting chord for me of, what?
Yeah, I mean, because, if that's your idea of the holiday, then, you're truly not even, understanding the purpose behind it at that point.
Yeah.
It's like Christmas without any of the lore behind it. It's just a day that you put up a tree and you get some presents.
It doesn't even have the Santa context.
Yeah, it's just the stuff.
The Coke Bears come out.
Yeah.
And there's the fat man in a suit that's kind of like a mascot for Christmas, but who cares about him?
Yeah, that's...
Presents and tree.
That's pretty sad, honestly, because, as a concept, I really enjoy the 4th of July. I enjoy the idea of, patriotism and, going out and celebrating America. And, the fireworks were always so fun growing up.
Yeah. But I feel like the fireworks and the pomp and the circumstance has so much now eclipsed in the discourse. The fact that the Declaration of Independence is the day that we declared war. And the day that we announced, that we were actively willing to, if our demands were not met, go to extreme lengths to separate ourselves from British rule.
Yeah.
And that's really what's at the heart of the whole thing, along with a whole bunch of other things, which will, don't you worry, we'll get into it. But I decided that I really wanted to do a civically minded episode, and leading up to the episode, it was really hitting home with me that, like, a civically minded July 4th episode was the right thing to do. And it's funny that I mentioned that, because today, for our two main films, we're going to be doing All the President's Men and Do the Right Thing.
2 movies about doing the right thing, but only one of them named it.
But it's going to be, we were talking beforehand, it's going to still be a fun episode, as fun as we can make it, but it is meant to be mindful.
Yes.
It's going to be as fun as we can make it, obviously, because I don't want y'all to feel like you're eating your vegetables.
I mean, you can eat your vegetables, but they can, be seasoned appropriately.
They could have Parmesan.
It could be a good time.
And so we want to still make sure that this is a good time for y'all, but we also want to enrich. And if you're here to listen, then maybe this is also an opportunity to be here to learn and maybe pick up something that you want to go and dive into and learn more about, and then you can go and you can spread truth and be a foundational point for doing some good in a properly patriotic way.
Or woo! Fireworks! At the end of the day, whatever works for you, homie. But if you've gotten this far, then I think you're hooked.
No, that's fair. And so, before we get into the discussion on those movies, though, just out of curiosity, you talked about patriotism being something that you feel, and some of the emotions that you've already, talked about feeling evoked by the holiday. Are there any other feelings that you sort of feel about Independence Day? And also, what are some movies, of course, or TV shows that make you think of Independence Day?
Oh, I think that second part was the harder part of the question. I don't know. Other than Independence Day?
Yeah.
I don't know. They play that thing on loop, just like Christmas Story at Christmas time. I'll come back to that one. What do I feel during the 4th of July, other than, I guess, pride and in the idea of, what, what it is to be an American. We were always brought up to be very, proud to be an American. Everything is, very boastfully American. And I think that, other than the fact that it was the hardest holiday for me to dress for, other than, Valentine's Day, because I just don't have a lot of, red in my wardrobe. I always enjoyed this weird celebration that, you shot off fireworks because of reasons, I guess because they, reminded you of the war or something, but they were also really pretty, and it was really the only time of year that we did that other than New Year's. And I don't know, it was just kind of one of those nice little summer holidays. I have, a very vivid memory of a 4th of July where my parents, it was, my siblings and I are, pretty big gaps apart, so this was the time when and I'm the baby, so I was probably 16 or something. The older two were out of the house at this point, and we were trying to find a place to watch fireworks, and we ended up on this back road somewhere because apparently there were fireworks being shot off here, supposedly. And we just drove for what felt like an eternity. I felt like we were going to, miss the show wherever it was, back these, dirt roads and crap. And then out of nowhere, we just came upon this, field of parked cars that were just, all people just, had some lawn furniture and stuff, and they just had like parked themselves out of their car, kind of like a drive-in movie theater, just to watch these people shoot off fireworks in some random, like, in the middle of nowhere place. And I just really remember that night being like, I'm surprised we made it. It felt like we were in the car for hours, going somewhere that was supposed to be supposedly in Charlotte.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I don't think we're in Charlotte anymore. I think we've made it halfway to Virginia by now.
Huh.
And I don't know, it reminds me of the times when, like, yeah, it's in the middle of summer, you were out of school at this point, and it was one of those holidays that you got to hang out with your parents, and I'm not one of those people who are like, ugh, my parents. Like, I enjoy hanging out with my folks a lot. I am their child. And so, like, this was one of those times that I got to hang out with mom and dad instead of them being off at work and me being bored at the house, because I was also some weird homebody child that never left the home, and just watched TV all the time. But again, I can't think of, like, another Independence Day movie, or something. I mean, something that makes me think about America, Patton.
Okay.
I think that Patton is a very, like, America movie, and, like, MASH, things that but it's about war. They're both about war. The only things that I could think of that are, like, swimming in patriotism, other than Independence Day, are war movies.
I've got another movie for you for Independence Day, very specifically.
Okay, shoot.
The Patriot.
See,
Mel Gibson's The Patriot.
And I don't think I've ever seen that movie all the way through. It was one of those movies...
With young Heath Ledger.
Like Independence Day that was always on TV.
Yeah.
And so, good luck catching it from the beginning, guys.
No, that's fair.
Because back in the day, you couldn't just flip on an app and press a button and play something. You had to find the TV guide.
No, that's pretty fair.
And sometimes movies were just halfway done, and you just had to accept that.
Yeah, you were more there to watch whatever was coming next.
Yeah.
In full.
You
were catching whatever was on that channel.
That's how I watched a lot of the Harry Potter movies. Just like, I mean, I had seen them, obviously, from beginning to end. But, like, count the number of times that I've seen that movie whole. I don't know. Count the number of times that I've done, like, partial watches. Thousands.
But I think that everything that you said is pretty fair, and I've heard that story before, but it's an enjoyable story, and I don't really have, I think, like a really strong, personally, like a really strong 4th of July story that really comes to mind, honestly. It's not one of those holidays for me that has ever really had all the occasion. I've gone and done fireworks with my family, and I've gone and done cookouts with different parts of my family, but it's definitely more of sort of the amalgam memory of, like, childhood 4th of Julys than any sort of singular specific thing. And so, Independence Day is definitely one of those that I like the idea of it, but again, I think that it's also, like we talked about, one of those ones that sort of has now just become odd.
Yeah.
For me personally, it's just like an odd holiday now. And it's one that I've also started to become more and more disassociated with. The older and older that I've gotten, and the more and more that kind of the meaning and the celebration of it has shifted.
I get that. It's definitely one of my B-list holidays. Like, there's the A-list ones where, like...
Halloween.
Yeah.
That's my A-list all year, Actually, that's S-tier. If I'm really, like, ranking these in proper tier, that's S-tier. That's top-notch.
Well, no, yeah. That's completely fair. But, like, the ones that, like, are a true bank holiday. Not just, like, oh, good, it's Memorial Day.
Yeah.
The 4th of July. You know what I mean? Because then there's also C-listers, like St. Patrick's Day, where you just have to work on that day. You just get to quote-unquote celebrate.
No, that's fair. But I wanted to go ahead and jump into a little bit of the history of Independence Day, if I may.
Sure. Honestly,
let's go ahead and get this thing cooking. And
after all of these years of the American public school system and celebrating this holiday, I actually don't know, if we ever were really taught anything about it.
We were taught some about it, but it's probably very spotty, and also at an age where, like, it doesn't really sink.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I get that.
So here's a little bit of some Independence Day, July 4th related history for y'all. So Independence Day is the day that the American Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Second Continental Congress. It is not the day that it was signed.
Well, already my grasp on history is completely flawed.
So the original signing took place actually August 2nd, 1776.
Okay.
July 4th was just the adoption date. The process of arriving at a declaration was a sort of months-long journey where people met once a month, every month for like a certain period of time to sort of discuss and deliberate on this issue. And what ended up happening is July 4th, they decided to adopt this Declaration of Independence, which is essentially when it was going into then final drafting stage. It had already gone through a sort of drafting process that began earlier on. At the end of it all, 56 delegates signed the Declaration of Independence, and they signed it in order of geography. They went from the northmost colony to the southmost colony. So it was signed in delegate order from New Hampshire to Georgia.
Fantastic. I love that being the order that they did that. They all got in a line in order. Like, when you were a kid and they were like, all right, line up by height.
They were like, all right, line up by colony, northmost to southmost.
They weren't even like, let's do this thing alphabetically. They were like, all right, know your geography, everyone. Let's do it. Pop, pop, tip, tip.
So the signing took place in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically, which was also where the Second Continental Congress had sort of established themselves as the meeting point of this body. And the Declaration was primarily drafted by a handful of people. John Adams from Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania, Robert Livingston from New York, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, and the person who was supposed to really be doing like the hard labor here, the writing, the heavy lifting, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia.
Woo, Virginia. Boo, Thomas Jefferson.
What I find interesting about that list is I think that it really highlights the core idea of this, which is that like this entire body was built up of a bunch of people that were decided upon by their states to be representatives. This is before there was any kind of recognized federal body. The only recognized government was the British government. And so these were kind of home-drafted people who were thrown together by the circumstance of this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, all of that stuff about this is where they met, this is where they decided to sign, this is how many people signed, this is who drafted it, is all well and good. The Declaration was essentially us announcing ourselves separate from Britain. If, like I said, certain demands were not met, we would part ways, under whatever terms that required.
This means war.
And, so it's all well and good to say that this is when we did it, this is how we did it, this is, all of those elements, but it doesn't really get to the heart of why.
Mm-hmm.
So for a little bit of American history backstory, because I feel like this is probably the moment where everyone is probably the wibbliest on American history. Is essentially from...
Like the Revolution?
From when we started up to about the Constitution.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. So, like, a week passed, right?
And so, of course, America did not start with colonial... North America settlement did not start with colonial America. There were Native Americans who were here before colonial America. Those people are thought to have crossed over from Eurasia across a landmass that is called Beringia. They were originally thought to have settled in Beringia and then migrated further into North America and then eventually what would become South America and Central America. But that they really, migrated either or direction out of that landmass once water took it over, and it became the Bering Strait between Russia and Alaska. And that all happened sort of thousands of years ago, and those people settled into North America and spread geographically sort of from the West Coast over. European settlement really starts with the 1600s, much, much later. We're talking about, like, pre-BC, or, pre-AD into BC, or BCE, when these people crossed over Beringia into North America.
Wait, so which one? I'm sorry, you said literally all of them.
BC, or, so they came over in BC or BCE.
Okay.
Pre-AD.
Copy.
And so... they were very good and thoroughly settled across North America by the 1600s, which is when European settlement properly came over. There's, of course, the talk of, like, the Vikings coming and moving over to North America, but they never really settled here in a way that mattered, if at all. So, proper European settlement began kind of with, like, a conflagration of course, European economic interests, but also European religious interests, with groups like the Pilgrims and the Puritans coming over and also founding colonies. And, of course, the big sort of founding point that a lot of people point to is 1620 with the founding of the Plymouth colony. Which is also where you get the statement, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us.
Yes.
Is a callback to that sort of point, which is when a group of European settlers landed in Plymouth and established a colony. So, like, from sort of 1620, if we use that as an establishing point onward, it was, like I said, this mix of religious colonies, like Pilgrims, who were pretty chill, and Puritans, who were not chill at all. They had been sort of ostracized because of the extremism of Puritan belief by the Church of England, and then also at large by other European countries. They actually kind of bounced around Europe before eventually deciding to swing around and just come to the colonies.
But they weren't the problem. It was everybody else.
And so the early, like, 100-ish years, right, if we take 1620 to 1720, the first, like, 100-ish years were a real shit show in the colonies. The genocide of the indigenous tribes of America, also then, of course, just, like, starvation and famine issues, because they didn't know how to cultivate the land, they didn't know how to live here, they didn't know what to eat. And so that's, of course, the foundational things of Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
Is that we were about to die, and some people took pity on...
They shouldn't have. I'm saying it right here and now. We've got a record of it. They should have let them die.
And, you had, like, things like, Roanoke-type events, where just colonies had mass incidents that just sort of wiped them out. And you had all of these sorts of problems. And you eventually, of course, hit the witch trials. And so, like, the first 100 years of the American colonies, real fucking nightmare.
They were going through their teenage angst years.
And it results in, like, loads of death, just generally across the board. Moving on, of course, then you get into the 1700s, and things are kind of okay there. However, eventually you run into America being the ground zero for what becomes a global conflict known as the 7 Years' War, which actually took place over 9 years, but don't worry about that.
It didn't roll off the tongue.
And what became known here is the French-Indian War.
That's correct.
And the 7 Years' War was a battle between Britain and France, but it essentially began with a skirmish over the Ohio Valley region in America, which was Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, etc. And the person that ended up leading that battle and losing his ass at Fort Necessity, July 3rd, 1754, was George Washington.
Oh, is that the terrible one where all the people died and he survives?
Yeah.
Oh.
He lost his ass and surrendered handily and was essentially the sort of last man standing of an absolute ass whooping at Fort Necessity.
I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at the ass whooping. I'm honestly just laughing at the fact that somebody named this fort Necessity.
And then they lost it.
They did.
We need it. And then they lost it.
They lost Necessity.
You hate to see it happen. But the 7 Years' War was fought from 1754 to 1763. And that actually is also where the bedrock sort of foundation of the conflict between the crown and the colonies begins.
Okay.
Because the colonies were left to do a lot for a long time. And then Britain kind of gets the colonies involved in this shitstorm. And then when the war is done, Britain has all of these debts, and they go, okay,
let's tax them.
You're now going to pay for this. And they said, we were allowed to do whatever the fuck we wanted, and then you got us into this mess. And they said, yeah, but whatever, we fought to save you.
We own you.
So therefore, you're going to pay.
Ugh.
And they said, I don't think that we're going to pay. And they said, you're going to pay, and also, by the way, we're now also stationing troops in your homes.
To make sure that
To make sure that you're also not only paying, but also because we're kind of hard up right now, and we're trying to, increase our military force across the colonies. So you're gonna house these people, and you do not get a say. And also, if you say anything too out of line, they'll report you for sure.
And they wondered where this went wrong. They were like, I don't understand. These were all reasonable terms made by, sound and able bodies.
And so this is kind of what became the bedrock for American Revolution. And this is what led us to the point of deciding, and the core underlying idea of this, and I want to stress this, was taxation without representation. They weren't anti-tax. For a long time, they weren't even anti the crown. They had been allowed to do what they wanted. They even paid some taxes to a certain degree. But at a certain point, it became excessive, and they didn't have any say in any of the matters that were happening that led to these events.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even an anti-tax. It was taxation without representation was kind of one of the underpinning points that they tried to stress to build sentiment against the crown. Mm-hmm. Was, why are these people who are so far away, who have so little say in what we do, now demanding so much of us for what they forced us to do when we don't get any kind of say in Parliament?
We shall create a democracy.
And that was kind of, again, the underpinnings, and some of the founding fathers' ideas were very heavily influenced by things that they had learned and studied from some of the great thinkers and philosophers of European thought. And so it was kind of this influx of two ideas coalescing together, which is, what if we took these ideas of trying to create a better society and our own desire to be separate from the crown and blended these ideas together and said, you know what, let's try and make a government that is separate from a monarchy, which was pretty rare, if not completely rare at the time. Almost every single major government at that time was established by a monarchy.
Is that related to the exceptionalism?
Partially.
Okay.
But, you think about it, even in Japanese history, the shogun and the shogunates and the emperors, and it's even in so much of these cultures across the globe, so much of it is bloodline-based.
No,
in
you're
the way
completely
that
right.
rule happens. Even in certain tribes, it is so heavily bloodline-based. And this was a real chance at, trying to take some of these ideas that we had learned from philosophers like John Locke and combine them with our own want for self-governance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the bedrock. And the starting point for that was the Declaration. And that is the back history of July 4th, the day that we decided as a conglomerate of 13 colonies that we were going to, in a unified voice, with a delegation of 5 states voicing our opinion, write a formal rebuke of the crown and its dominion over us, and that we were going to, if necessary, chart our own course.
Hell
and
yeah.
I think that is the power and the importance of Independence Day, and also hits at the idea that once upon a time, these 13 colonies relied on each other.
Well, they had a common enemy.
Mm-hmm. And we had to work together to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to promise and establish certain things for ourselves to make everyone's lives better.
Every citizen's lives
Mm-hmm.
better.
And also, though, I think that at the core of it, we start to hit at, now we have to apply, what do those ideas of civic duty and responsibility and ownership to what you do and how you do it, and the compass toward doing the right thing and what it means to be American starts to sort of hit with, how do you justify that in a country that is now so far removed from 13 colonies where they met once a month because it took you fucking weeks to travel? What does it mean to now be an American in this context where there are way more amendments than were ever in the Bill of Rights, where it's an entire apparatus that the Founding Fathers could have never ever conceived of? And I think that that's where we start to get into some of the discussion with our new films for today's episode, starting with All the President's Men. All the President's Men is about 2 reporters audaciously going after the Watergate scandal. The Watergate scandal, for those who don't know, was essentially President Nixon was a deranged lunatic who was sort of power-hungry and bent on knowing absolutely what everyone was thinking and talking about at all times, and ended up getting caught funding a break-in to the hotel where Democratic leadership was meeting to try and learn insider information. It's the really boiled down talking points. And he completely escaped culpability by stepping down and accepting a pardon where he technically accepted guilt for the crime, but also then could never run for office again or hold office again. And that was totally fine. That was how he got away with the whole thing. And it was decided that that was how the nation was going to heal, was by letting Nixon get away with it. And All the President's Men was released a few years after the incident. The film was released April 1979. Its runtime is 2 hours, 18 minutes. It's rated PG.
No. No, this movie is not rated PG.
It's 1979. It's rated PG. Just like Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark.
Oh my gosh.
It had a budget of $8.5 million.
This movie is minimum PG-13 now.
It grossed $70.6 million.
Fantastic.
It was directed by Alan J. Pakula. It's written by William Goldman. And it stars Dustin Hoffman as Carl Bernstein, Robert Redford as Bob Woodward, Jack Warden as Harry Rosenfeld, Martin Balsam as Howard Simmons, Jason Robards as Ben Bradley, and the immortal Hal Holbrook as the equally immortal Deep Throat. The official plot is the Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein uncover the details of the Watergate scandal that leads to President Nixon's resignation. Dear, what did you think of All the President's Men, and what was your familiarity with Nixon and the Watergate scandal before going into the film? I have a feeling a lot of it is based in Futurama.
No, I mean, you're not wrong. Let's see. Well, I guess I'll start with the last one, because that's that's the one that's the first in my head right now. So my familiarity with the Watergate incident and this whole business with Nixon, I mean, honestly, like, Futurama pretty much, like, you know, gives the sound bites of it, but, like, that's pretty much also just my general knowledge of it was the fact that, you know, Nixon liked to record everything, and something went down at the Watergate where, like, he was, you know, planting bugs or something, and, you know, he got caught, but it was this crazy investigation that happened, and then Nixon resigned, and the end. You know, that's kind of basically exactly what you just said, but, like, you know, that was my understanding of it, was that, you know, I've never, gosh, you know, there's so much that with the access to the internet, it's almost overwhelming, you know, but back in the day, you know, you had your sound bites, and that was pretty much all you got, because, like, you couldn't just go and look something up on Wikipedia, you know, real quick. You had to go to a library. Nobody has time for that. So, like, my real understanding for it is pretty vague. I don't even know who, I genuinely do not know, and I know that you do. I don't know who became president after. Was it Ford?
Yeah, so Gerald Ford ended up being sworn in, and he was only president for, like, a little brief window of time, and then he ended up losing, you know, like, an election bid.
So, honestly, yeah, I thought this,
This is what led to Carter winning the White House.
Copy. Jimmy Carter? You know, we need a new Jimmy Carter, but that's a different topic. What was your first question?
What did you think of the film?
Oh,
All
okay.
the President's Men.
Oh, perfect. That was where I was going to go. I just wanted to make sure. I really enjoyed this movie. It was a fascinating window, and I really enjoyed the mystery behind it. You know, it's really wrapped in this wanting to know the truth, and people going, "Don't worry about it."
It's fine.
And, you know, them going, "Why shouldn't I worry about it? Like, why can't you guys just tell me what's going on?"
Because it's just a break-in. It's fine.
Yeah. And every time, you know, people, they would look further in it. Everybody would be like, why are you poking around so much? You know, why don't you just stop?
It was just a riot.
Yeah. You know, it's fine.
It was just a group of people.
Yeah.
That acted independently. Don't worry about it. Don't poke too far.
Yeah, you know, whatever you think happened definitely didn't happen. And so it was this kind of, like, fun journey down this rabbit hole with two phenomenal actors that, like, I've never seen at this point in their careers, you know.
acting in a... No one today would go, I'm going to put Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman... Sorry, I don't mean to derail you. No one today would go, I'm going to put Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman in a movie together.
Yeah, they would be like, well, what are we doing here? What kind of movie are you trying to make?
What the fuck movie is this? But this is them as young men, to your point,
you know,
at the height of them being young actors.
No, and for sure, and like neither of them are really pigeonholed into any kind of thing yet, you know. So, it's really great to just watch these two people, you know, be people for a little bit and not just be famous. And it's truly, it kind of reminds me of Wormwood a little bit. You know, where the deeper you go, the more rotten it is.
And it's that same... Bob Woodward is of that same caliber as... And I'm blanking on who it is that's in Wormwood, but he's that same caliber of investigator. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein are in that same level of guy that was like, I can tell you everything right now, but if I do, it'll burn my source completely.
Yeah.
And then that's that. He's of that same caliber. These guys are.
No, for sure. And them literally, like, scraping at the bare bottom. Like, you know, everybody being so mad at them for not revealing their sources and this, that, and the other. But, like, they're doing the work and they're doing it well. And they know that they're doing something that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers and get a lot of people in trouble. And, like, the fact that, you know, they practically go door to door through like a phone book of employee list names several times in order to just get somebody, just one person, to talk to them, and just tell them what's going on in the inner circle of this organization. And everybody is so scared shitless that nobody wants to give them anything, and which raises more red flags. You know, why doesn't anybody want to talk about this?
Well, and that actually, I think, really starts to hit on a good point that I wanted to hit on, which is that good journalism, accurate journalism, the kind of journalism that people should aspire towards, the kind of journalism that keeps people informed, the kind of journalism that is of a civic good, is hard fucking work. And it is making sure that you are damn certain before you shoot, because you can't miss, because this is important, because you are about to tell people that the President of the United States did X, and what you can't do is miss.
No, yeah, and honestly, and this is in a day and age when, you know, media is an ever growing,
at this point,
it's an ever growing medium as a whole. You know, television, radio, the written word, with newspapers and magazines, and it's really cooking at this point in time, and it's definitely not to the point where we are in history where there's just such a flood of information. But all
we're
the time.
getting real close to cable. We're getting really close to cable in time.
You're not wrong. And so, like, to your point of this being hard-hitting journalism, these are people who are taking the medium seriously. You know, this isn't your fluff pieces. This isn't the deluge of you know, BuzzFeed quizzes of what type of cat you are.
I didn't go and get some fucking comms degree and, you know, half-ass my way into some sort of legitimate job at a serious publication. You know, this was hard work. People were editing these things like old school grade teachers with red fucking ink that would throw that shit back at you if it was bad.
Yeah, you know. And I think that this movie just perfectly also creates this world for this story, for, you know, this journey. Like, I feel like I'm getting pretty accurate information, even though this is so close to the incident itself. I don't feel cheated by that, because, you know, the further out you get from something, the more information you get, and the more in depth you can go with X.
Well, and it was written by the book that the script is based on. Was written by the journalists who broke the story.
So I think that that's perfect.
And I think that it has a good filter by it being one, them going to the book, which had an editor,
Mm-hmm.
and then them not writing the script, but it going to another person. And I
Yeah.
think that was a good filter that kept it more objective.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because also, again, you know, you can write something, you can love something, but not be the right person to do the job. So, you know, even though they are writers, and they wrote this book, but that doesn't mean that like they could write this movie. You know,
Yeah.
Genuinely speaking, they can advise it. They can point in the right direction for sure. But also, you know, like they did, you're gonna have to figure it out.
Yeah. I think what's a real shame for me is, and this isn't necessarily about the movie, it's about our interaction with history, if I may sort of get a little bit off topic just for a second.
Sure.
Is that this is a fascinating, ever-relevant story that pop culture has now boiled down to a word, Watergate, that has now been truncated even further down to gate. It's now this suffix that gets slapped onto other things to create a sense of scandal. Pizzagate. God, I can't think of another one off the top of my head right now. But I feel like gate gets tacked on haphazardly, kind of like how the Weather Channel now goes and slaps names on blizzards, even though everyone tells them not to because it degrades the concern over hurricanes. I feel like the way that gate has now been turned into this sort of pop culture suffix of slap it on a thing and it's a scandal.
Mm-hmm.
Has now diminished the fact that this is a scandal that went, in our modern age, all the way up to the highest level of office.
Yeah.
And I think that watching this movie really highlights how intricate and dedicated the systems in place are if they choose to try and circumvent the systems in place to check that office.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this shows just how dedicated, you know, people are willing to go to seize any length of power. And how good journalism is going as deep as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a really, really hard-hitting movie for all of those points. And I think that it was really interesting to go back and watch a movie that was really just so about the grind.
For sure, because there's no like trickery of moviedom for the audience where you get to know the truth before your main characters do. No, you're going on the journey with Carl and Bob, working hard, getting into arguments within their own partnership, you know, but wanting so desperately to know the truth and you know, even though they have Deep Throat as a guide, for the most part he's not willing to say anything on record, because once he says something on record, then they'll know exactly who he is, and that compromises his existence as well, because only he could know this information.
Yeah.
So it's this web of trying to find more people to corroborate this story, to find the evidence on their own so that way they can back it instead of just getting handouts from this person.
Yeah.
You know, it's truly just a really fascinating story, because also, you know, it is history. It's talking about real things, and just like how deep the rabbit hole goes was just a fascinating window into this for me, because of the fact that I only knew sound bites.
Did it help clarify any of the history on the Watergate scandal you?
I think that for me, because of the watering down of Watergate, even from just, you know, it was literally 20 years before I was born. You know, no, wait. No, I'm thinking about Roe. This is 70. No.
The movie is 79.
The movie's
or
76.
So it would have been a few years before this.
Well, still 20 plus years before.
It would have been about 20, yeah.
before I was born, and even by that point, by the time we were learning about this, it had been so just like bogged down to sound bites, you know. So this was completely illuminating of the fact of the seriousness of the situation, you know, because of that thinning happening. I didn't realize, you know, what the real big deal was.
Well, and I think the movie also does the smart job of kind of like, let's strip out Nixon from the situation. Nixon is really almost a footnote in this story, and the greater story of Nixon leading up to the primary and the win and all of that and blah 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 plays out in like TV in the background and radio in the background.
No,
and
yeah.
instead they go, look at how cancerous this mechanism was.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just look at this mechanism that does touch the president. We've established that it does already.
But it also reaches so far.
Let's look at how cancerous it is.
And it's in the blood of these people. People were afraid.
Yeah, it's going so far. It's going so deep.
And nobody told them to be afraid, and nobody told them to keep secret. But
they knew that they had to.
Exactly. And that's the thing
They knew that they were being watched. They knew
that their lives could be in danger.
Yeah. And no one explicitly ever outright threatened them. But they were abundantly aware that everything was wrong.
And that's fascinating, and that's a lot of red flags going up for an entire group of people who are also kind of trapped as well.
Because there's no getting out at that point. Not gracefully.
No, and like the one person that does end up getting quote unquote out of it is because he caused a ruckus. And like basically had to go out like a Disney Channel star, you know? Show your tits, you get out of the club for free.
Yeah.
And this movie was just really eye-opening to the severity of what this meant, what it was, because I didn't know how far it went, you know, how hard they tried to keep this a secret.
And he went on record, Nixon, just after this in the Frost-Nixon interviews, as essentially saying that if you do an illegal action as the president, it is not illegal. And I think that that mindset makes it all the more important that people like Bernstein and Woodward and his bosses, like, you know, Ben Bradley, went all the way to the core of this thing to expose it as thoroughly as they did. Because if you allow any kind of mindset of an office of power of any level makes you above consequence,
and honestly,
is a poisonous idea.
Yeah, because honestly, that's completely our system, you know, up until that point as well. And I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not still happening today, but that was really the first time that it finally became public. You know, and we had incidents of you know, corporate corruption happening all throughout history, but they could keep it under wraps easier because, you know, the rules were a little bit looser. They didn't have to, you know, they could push this thing as far down as they wanted to because there were only a few elite people, and, you know, anybody who thought that they could say something was dead before they could. You know, you could do what you wanted. And so, like, that kind of mindset led to people like Nixon and like, that party literally thinking that they could do whatever they wanted. And for a time, they were successful because he did win the presidency because of these things, you know? Like,
yeah, and that's the important thing to remember here. Nixon got caught. It went wrong. It got sloppy. He got caught. He might have never gotten caught, and he could have gotten away with it. He could have gotten away with it.
We could have had a whole nother term of Nixon and come to this point in history and just be finding out about it because of the way that, you know, things finally open up after a certain period of time because everybody in the incident has to be dead, basically.
And so I think that it's pretty telling and pretty interesting. And I think that it's honestly it's something that I don't think as a movie people go, oh, there are certain people that you meet that go, oh, All the President's Men is great. But I think that by and large, for whatever reason, it's not as talked about, not as referenced, not as brought up a movie anymore. And I think that it's a movie that a lot of people should watch.
Oh, for sure. My thing is, I love and hate the name. I think that it is very clever, and I understand it after watching the entire context of this movie. But just as a name for a movie, it literally could be anything. It could be a movie about building the cabinet.
Yeah.
All the President's Men. It could be a war movie.
Yeah.
You know, it could be literally anything. And so, honestly, like, I think that that's probably, like, my only note for this movie is that the fact that it has a vague title.
So if you had to give it a rating out of 5, what would you give it?
I'm gonna give this movie I'm gonna give this movie 4.5.
Okay. I'm gonna go 4.5 as well. I think that that's fair.
I think this movie flows really nicely. I think that it really keeps the attention and it's really interesting. And I think that it's really well done. I think that it really holds up for a movie from 1976.
Yeah.
Really solid.
No, for sure. I agree. I think it's great performances by everyone involved. I love Hal Holbrook as Deep Throat. I think he does a great job at having this severity and this mystery and this moral rightness while still being so vague a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he really does a good job at fleshing that all the way out. And I really quite liked it. I guess we should move on now.
Yes.
We'll jump forward 13 years. And we'll jump into Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. So, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing was released July 21st, 1989. It's about to have its birthday.
Oh, nice.
Its runtime is 2 hours even. It's rated R. It had a budget of $6.5 million. It grossed $37.2 million. It is written and directed by Spike Lee, but this is before he started calling his films a Spike Lee joint. And it stars Danny Aiello, Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee, Richard Edson, Giancarlo Esposito, Spike Lee, Bill Nunn, John Turturro, Rosie Perez, and Samuel L. Jackson as Mr. Senor Love Daddy. And the premise is on the hottest day of the year on a street in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, everyone's hate and bigotry smolders and builds until it explodes into violence.
Wow.
I guess I'll kick this one off. So the first time that I saw this movie was back in college. It was a movie that I had heard a lot about, and the first time that I saw it was actually in a college class, and it was kind of a thing where, you know, we would go through every decade and we would sort of watch a movie that professor felt emulated that decade. And it was a media history class at large, so we covered print media, radio, TV, film, at all. And he would sort of summarize film of a time period with a specific film. And so for the 90s of independent cinema and the sort of rebel filmmaker generation of, you know, Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith and Spike Lee, he decided to go with Do the Right Thing. And it was also a day where he said, you know, he did not take attendance if you did not want to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's definitely because Do the Right Thing is not an easy film. It's one of the most incredible movies you will ever watch, and it's not like the hardest film you will ever watch, but it's a very intense, in-your-face Spike Lee movie in every sense of what that could possibly mean. And I think that I was really taken with this movie when I first watched it. It was so theatrical of a film without being based on a play. And it was so colorful, and the characters were so fleshed out, and the language was so particular, and the imagery was so specific and striking. And I was really, really, really taken with this movie. I had seen 2 Spike Lee movies before this. I had seen The 25th Hour. No, 3. I had seen The 25th Hour, I had seen A Miracle at St. Anna, and I had seen Inside Man. And so, you know, I had even seen with Miracle at St. Anna some of his direct touching on race. And I was really blown away by this movie. Like, it really touched me to the core, and it was one of those movies that I routinely would go back and think about. And so going back and rewatching it was honestly just as much of a treat, if not even better, in some ways, on another watch. Because I was able to kind of take a step away from some of just, like, the shock value of just being blown off my fucking ass by this absolute experience of a movie, and I could really digest it, you know, after all these years of thinking about it, you know, sort of separated from the time of it. And it's still so relevant. And that's heartbreaking in its own way, but also I think speaks to how deftly he was able to craft a story that is, 1, dripping in the time that it's made, but 2, timeless in the core of its narrative. What about you?
I really enjoyed this movie a lot. I'm not very familiar with Spike Lee's filmography. I'm not gonna lie.
You've seen Inside Man. We watched that one together.
Yes. Could I tell you at this moment what it's about based on the title alone? Probably not.
The robbery one with Denzel and Clive Owen, where Clive Owen
the one
is the bank robber.
Yes, and he puts himself in the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, again, another titled movie where I go, I don't know. And yeah, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. I couldn't get through to Five Bloods. I still, that's I guess a bucket list item of.
It's a great movie.
I mean, yeah, but it hurt the spirit to watch. But I thought that this movie had like a really interesting, like, to your point, very theatrical. It's very poppy. It does very much remind me of like the 90s kind of film in the sense of, you know, there's a lot of fun, weird angles and a lot of interesting things done with the camera and a lot of storytelling done with just the cinematography alone. And then there's the scenes where we've got, you know, the entire crowd of the ensemble basically of this movie put into their own blocking in this tableau shot as each of them has a line to say as the camera pans over them.
Each
you know,
of them says the name of someone who died at the hands of a cop.
Yeah, and these moments of like true like, you know,
theater stuff.
Yeah, no, honestly.
The opening with Rosie Perez dancing. In front of this more set-like.
The scene of them, you know, doing racial slurs about a different race, you know, presented to us by different races each time as well. You know, it's kind of this like, we are all the same, but we're all disgusting kind of thing. And the whole movie kind of has this almost like whimsical authority to it, where it knows exactly what it wants to tell you, but it's also very light and very like poppy almost.
And it can use fantasy to be fun,
or it can be fantasy to be mean and ugly.
Yeah. And it can all be under this umbrella of fantastical, of this weird day on this weird street that exists but doesn't exist.
In
where
New
we
York.
have this Greek chorus as presented by this narrator radio DJ.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of expressing these sort of other ideas and presenting narrative shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And moments for pause and reflection and curve in the narrative. And, you know, you even get bits that are entirely unrelated until suddenly those characters appear somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And you go, oh shit, that's Sweet Dick Willie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who's been just kind of, again, one of these almost chorus figures. Mm-hmm. Narrating from the sideline. There are certain characters that are like active narrative characters and certain characters that are chorus characters. Ozzie Davis as DeMayer, Sister Mother Ruby D, the three men over outside the Korean grocer, and Senor Love Daddy, Mr. Senor Love Daddy, excuse me, I think are all kind of chorus characters more so. They are commenting on the block, on the nature of the block,
from different perspectives.
and they are rarely engaged very directly in the action. DeMayer is probably the most directly engaged in the action all the time. And then you have active narrative characters. Sal, Vito and Pino, Mookie, the group of teens, Radio Raheem, who's kind of our Achilles. He's kind of our mythic character. There's a real Greek nature to the tragedy of the story.
No, honestly, and I think that that's probably where he got a lot of like influence from, with just how to structure this ensemble piece. Because at the end of the day, it is an ensemble, and you were you know, talking, and I was thinking about what you were saying, and it was reminding me a lot of like Once on This Island, which is a show that you can do with a huge cast of people, or you can pretty much have exactly the number of people that you need to play one part, and then you could continue that through the rest of the story with them also being narrators when they're not playing their said part. And this kind of reminded me of that as well, because like, you know, you were talking about these narrative characters, and it is very you know, if I were to stage this, they would each have a part of the stage that was their set.
Yeah, Sister Mother Stoop.
Yeah, exactly. The three on the street with their chairs, you know.
The radio DJ's booth.
Yeah.
And then DeMayer would be the one that's my floater.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of also these different generations all colliding as well, and it's somehow magically still a fantastic representation of what New York is truly like as well.
Yeah.
In this weird fantastical lens.
Because very few movies have ever really captured how diverse a New York block sounds.
Mm-hmm. The fact that people are just sitting around in lawn chairs on the sidewalk.
With an umbrella.
Yes, that happens all of the time. Just playing cards. They brought a table from their apartment down to the street corner and are going to play cards and drink beers while people are trying to commute. That is a real thing that happens. That's a real thing, and I think that that's fantastic that somehow that he effortlessly put these characters in and everybody knows exactly who they're playing.
Radio Raheem don't give a shit where he's playing his radio.
No, yeah, because also it's the late 80s. Of course this guy has his beats blasting.
You know, random aside, very random aside, while Radio Raheem is on my mind, this thought popped in. I love the almost Western duel scene. Where Raheem comes up with his radio to the group of guys who have their radio.
Yes, and he fucking kills it.
And they have this radio off. And I loved that it's kind of this spaghetti Western
Yeah, like a
of
shoot
a
'em up.
boombox duel.
Yeah, because he's the king, and he was, he's like a lion asserting his dominance over the pride.
Your boombox is not the boombox of this block.
So my beats win, so therefore you have to turn off your beats.
Yeah.
I won this beats battle. And it's fantastic,
And he walks away just smoldering down the street, and it's such an Old West shot. Mm-hmm. And it's so good.
No, oh gosh. And like just everybody is just doing such a phenomenal job in the cast, as well. With I really just wasn't expecting Spike at all in this, and it was fun to see him also as a young man, because like modern day Spike Lee looks like our old theater teacher, and it just throws me the idea of this person ever being young or being hip or cool. You're just like, oh gosh, there's so and so with their thick glasses.
So Spike Lee, in his diary, his journal that he kept, talks about the fact that ultimately he is going to cast himself in the film, because he cast himself in a previous film of his out of partial necessity, and he didn't expect the positive feedback that he got from critics, and he thinks that it would be foolish to not capitalize on that energy now. And he knows that he has limits as an actor, so he'll have to be careful in how he structures the character that he's going to play. Maybe he'll play this character that kind of is a guy that'll pop off if you scuff his sneakers. Mm-hmm. And so originally I think that he was going to write himself, I haven't gotten to finish his journal, I think that he was going to write himself as bugging out.
I mean, that part, oh my god, that was fantastic. I was like, if any representation of like black culture is like absolutely 100% the most precise thing that you could have ever put, was that scene. I absolutely love the fact that this man comes, brushes his shoes, and then we get this like whole pan with the camera, just an instant shot of this scuff on this man's...
Yeah, just the whip pan right onto him,
And then, bam, right back onto the face, where he is like, what? And it's just so good. And like, this white dude has no idea what's going on, and it's such an interesting like perspective of like gentrification, and like the fact that like this dude just lives in this neighborhood because he can afford to, but like isn't a part of the neighborhood. We don't ever see that guy again.
No, he's not a part of the neighborhood, to your point. He does just live there.
And it's such an interesting and I loved the like gang of kids, that come around him, and then like they hype him up in this whole thing, and like I was like, this is exactly right. It's fantastic. That's probably one of my absolute favorite just like visual shots from this movie, because it just has so much flair.
Yeah.
And I think that this movie has a really subtle and interesting perspective. Well, not always subtle. I don't think that I could ever truly describe Spike Lee as a subtle individual.
No.
But I think this
He's about as subtle as a toothache.
That's right. And but this movie has its moments of being like really quiet and really introspective and really interesting, and then it's also very flashy and fun, but then it finds this like effortless flow into like the reality of the situation. There are a lot of fun times, and there's a lot of laughs and good times, and we can get on each other's nerves and that be okay. And then when the table turns, it has this really fantastic climax. Not saying that what actually happens is a fantastic thing that I highly recommend, but it's
fantastical in the sense of it is an awe-inspiring display.
It's
breathtaking.
It is, and you realize as a viewer, where the movie is going after this fun romp that we've basically been having. And it knows exactly how to be serious, and without playing it as a joke. You live in this moment, and you watch, a truly horrifying act happen, and you feel as helpless as the people around them.
It's Shakespearean tragedy.
It is.
It was a comedy for the first act.
Yes.
And now we're in the second act is Nightfall.
Yes.
It is a fun, for the most part, movie while it is day. And then it becomes nightfall, and DeMayer gives his soliloquy in the streetlight. Mm-hmm. And from there, the movie's mood shifts.
Yes, but it's also still completely within its own world of honesty. You know, Spike never once breaks his own themes that he's built while he's doing this, and I think that that's the thing that's truly inspiring also with him as a writer, is just the fact that he found the good, that perfect balance of all of these mini plates that he's juggling, and still managing to continue that through a tragic moment and still have, without losing any of them.
It is rigid structure that is, lyrical genius. Mm-hmm. It is truly Beethoven level precision of notes and moments that on the page you probably look at and go, huh? And then you hear it and you go, oh.
Like, this is truly a movie that I would use as like a reference point if I were ever going to
It's a master class.
To try my hand at writing something. Like, I would use this as like a blueprint, to figure out what works here and what I liked about this and how to bring that to my own work, because I would love to create something like this.
Orson Welles, if I'm not mistaken, said that in preparation for Citizen Kane he watched, and I could be wrong, like Stagecoach. Mm-hmm. Like at least 20 times.
Fascinating.
Because he considered that a perfect movie.
And I think that this is...
And so, to your point, I think that, like, you could look at the structure of this movie and how he uses language and character and aside and rhythm and tone and absolute classical structure in the most literal sense of, a 5-act play to create a narrative. And I think that it's those elements together that make something really unique and really special.
No, yeah.
Do you think anyone did the right thing?
I think that that's questionable. I think that at the end of the day, everybody had their own interests in mind, with bugging out, being like, I want black people on the Italian Wall of Fame, and not letting it go. Nobody was willing really to let go of their own thing in order to not like entirely let go, but to become a unit, to give and take a little bit. There could have been compromise all over the movie, but people stuck to their guns through to the end.
Yeah.
And without anybody letting up.
And maybe
it really caused a shift in the dynamic.
And you look at the characters that do kind of fare the best, and much of them are the most flexible. Mm-hmm. And I think that you're right. I think it is hard to say if anyone did the right thing, but I also think that the movie, after such a devastating ending, manages to create in a few minutes the promise that at the end of the day, if both parties are willing, things can be mended.
Yeah, because also at the end of the day, these people aren't strangers to each other. This man has been in this...
They are their own weird family.
Yeah, the pizza owner talks about all the time that, these kids in this neighborhood grew up on his pizza.
They grew up on my food.
And he was proud of that. And sure, he's his, John Turturro, the racist son. Sorry, John. you did a damn good job, though.
You did great, baby.
But having these kind of like, I loved the pizza owner with his angel son and his devil son, both on his shoulder. Well, when things were good, he leaned more into, the angel side, wanting to cooperate, wanting to be passive, wanting to be peaceful. But then also there are the things that made him mad, and then he would lean more onto Pino, to let that fire roar a little bit more, feed it. And it's just, I think that every character, I think that everything is perfectly, emphasized by the situation. And there are passive characters, but there also need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I think that this movie is necessary watching for every person in America. There are, maybe even in the world, there are not a lot of pieces of art, and I think that we've talked about this, and I think I might have even talked about this on the show. There aren't a lot of pieces of art that I think are necessary from every art form. There are very few pieces that I think from dance, music, poetry, film, song, what have you, are 100% necessary. And I'm sure that list, if I could live forever, would change.
Well, because
now,
the messages you need to hear will change.
Mm-hmm. Right now, and for the foreseeable future, as long as I'm alive, as far as I can tell, Do the Right Thing is a necessary piece of art from film.
No, honestly, because also, at the end of the day, I think that this movie, while it is very political, and has very opinionated, it is very accessible. Because I also think that because it is written from the perspective of the black side, I think that it has a lot of honesty in its messaging, because all of the characters are now real people and not just stereotypes.
And he's not without empathy for Sal.
No!
He's not without empathy for other perspectives. And I think that he gives every character pretty much, except for, like, the cops and John Turturro, almost every character has empathy.
Well, I think that even, the one cop, I think that he...
Yeah, the one more than the other.
Yeah, for sure. Because, technically, he was doing his job. These things escalated, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, also, you can tell in his face that he realizes that it's going too far. But by that point,
he vocalizes it multiple times.
It's too late. It's too late. You can't turn off the beast.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this movie is very, for it being, 1989.
Relevant today as ever.
Almost screaming.
And it was relevant just after the movie came out with the LA riots.
Yeah.
It was immediately relevant again.
Yeah, and with the atmosphere that's constantly ebbing and flowing through the American history currently, I don't see, to your point, this issue going away.
It's relevant
anytime soon without active change.
Yeah. And that's why this is such... And eventually it'll become necessary art just for how fucking good it is.
Oh, it's so good! It's so good! At the end of the day, I think that this is a damn fine piece of art. I think that it says exactly what it needs to say in a way that is inventive and fun to watch, mm-hmm. and also, really empowering and impactful, and all while, you've got...
That's 2 hours also.
Yeah, and you've got characters called Bugging Out and Mother Sister
and Radio Raheem.
This is not a fantasy world, but it's between fantasy and reality in this nice, smooth, and accessible place of fun that is completely 1989.
Yeah. It's a 5 out of 5 for me.
I just basically gave it a glowing endorsement. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. I think that this movie is truly spectacular. And also, I understand how that man became the man that made the 5 Bloods that I can't finish.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much all that we have for y'all movie-wise. Definitely go back and check out last week's episode from... our last Pride episode.
Woo!
Where we talked about Freaky, the slasher comedy with Mad. It was a great episode. It's July, so we will be having a newsletter soon. Be sure to come and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. And definitely be sure to come back next week when we're continuing our summer theme with the two documentaries, Endless Summer and The Summer of Soul.
Awesome.
So definitely be sure to come back and check that out. And I'll leave you off with one last little bit before we go on and finish up the show. I'll just read you off a little bit of two documents. First, the Declaration, and second, the Constitution, which, by the way, was adopted after we had already had a set of governing documents called the Articles of Confederation, which failed. And the Constitution was not actually ratified until 1789. But first, a little bit of the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to pursue them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And now, the preamble of the United States Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America.
The end.
Happy 4th of July, y'all. Bye.